Yo, what's happening, everybody? So in this video, I'm going to talk about what an assumption is, because when you think of the law of assumption, it's based on assumption. So it's important to have a really crystal clear definition and understanding of what an assumption is from a knowledge standpoint, and then also what it is from an emotional standpoint. Because when you make an assumption about something, let's break it apart. So I go to bed and I assume that when I wake up, I will be in the same bed. I put my car keys on the kitchen counter. I assume when I wake up, they're going to be on the kitchen counter. I go to bed with, my shoes in the closet. Before I go to bed, I put them in the closet. I assume they're going to be in the same spot, right? So assumptions are a state. And you talk about law of assumption, what we're really doing is we're really embodying states and allowing those states, conscious states, to express themselves through manifestational creative output, because all states basically express themselves, right? And the way that states become alive is there's conscious awareness of them. So when I make an assumption or I revise something in my head and I assume it is that way, the assumption is really powerful, because an assumption is a core feeling, knowing, belief about something to be a certain way with zero contradictory energy in it, right? And if you make an assumption that your now external reality sees as false, right? So you say you're like, I have $10, right? And you don't have $10, but you assume that you have $10. How do you assume that you have something that you don't physically have, right? Well, you have to de-link yourself from the physical reality and understand that, like when you were going to bed and your car keys were on the kitchen table, you don't physically have your car keys in your hand. You don't physically have sightline on the kitchen table. You just know that it is that way when you wake up, that those things are going to be there. Why is that? Why are you able to know that your car keys are there and that not some gremlin's going to crawl through the fucking ceiling fan and steal your shit, right? Like, why don't you have that thought pop in your head? Well, it's because your assumption is that you have enough, basically, evidence that you've been putting your car keys there every day for 10 years and it's not going to change, right? When you form a new assumption, this is really important, because what creates reality are the assumptions. Assumptions are not the responses to your track record of observing reality. That's the huge hang-up point for a lot of individuals, including myself, when I was really understanding this, is that when you hold an assumption about something, it crystallizes into fact, right? So say you have a computer program and it's bugging out on you, and you have the option to react and be like, well, let's go fix it, or you can simply put yourself into the state of assuming that it is the way you want it to be. And then once that assumption is anchored, you will naturally have manifestational, action-based creations come out of that state that are in alignment with it being the way your assumption is set up, right? Those are your two options. You can either accept a reality as it is, but if that reality is not the way you want it to be, you're missing your ideal. That's the whole concept of sinning. Sinning is not moral good or bad. Sinning is an archery term to where if your ideal is the bullseye, i.e. you get what you want, but you allow an assumption that this is not the way you want it to be crystallized in your mind as final, you've sinned and you will die in your sins, because there's no way to override a baseline assumption that is basically creating the manifestational output content of the state that it is dominantly expressing. So when you have an assumption, what it is it's an overwhelming feeling first from a generalized standpoint that it is the way you want it to be. And this is an emotional type of exercise, because when I assume that my car keys are there, it's not a affirmation thing like, oh man, my car keys are there, my car keys are there, my car keys are there, my car keys are there. Like, oh, I wake up in the morning, oh, I manifested it with my thoughts, my car keys are there. Like, no, it's an undisputable knowingness that this is reality and it will play out the way I expect it to 100% of the time, right? And the reason that persistence is brought up so much is because if you have an assumption that something isn't the way you want it, and you've held that assumption for a while, it's going to continually express itself because that state is dominant. So when you put in a new state, you'll still have a lot of counter feedback. Some people call it like the messy middle. You'll have a lot of craziness that pops up where it's like, no, your assumption's false. No, your assumption's false. No, your assumption's false. But the whole concept of faith is loyalty to that emotional state of mind perception of something being the way you want it to be, and you affix that, and you put all of your emphasis and focus on affixing the assumption, and you let everything else die that's not in favor with that assumption. Let the dead bury the dead, right? So if you're like, I have $10, I assume it's in my pocket right now, and then habitually you go like, check your pocket and it's not there, you just go, that's not real. And you reorient back to your assumption of what it would feel like to have $10 in your pocket, right? You assume it. You don't take physical action. You assume it from a mental, emotional standpoint that it is a certain way, right? And that's how you discipline yourself to see your result as already done in the now moment. Because reality is just a big fucking mirror. Now, the problem with reality a lot of the times is it's so fucking real that you get caught up in it all the time, right? This happens to 100% of people. It's not me ever talking to anybody specifically. This is just generalized, pitfalls of law of assumption type of talk, right? You assume, and that assumption is starting to push itself out into reality, right? The second you put that assumption out, it is starting to reflect itself in reality. Now, what we want to be aware of is that before you came to the conclusion that this assumption is better than the previous assumption, whether you were unconsciously creating the assumption or consciously creating it, you have an assumption that things are a certain way, and that has been externalized, which is another word for crystallized, meaning that it has hardened into fact, right? So if you think of like you flip on a light, right? That light has grown a whole jungle worth of manifestations. So now you're taking the light off of that and you're putting the light on the soil of a new thing. Well, there's still a bunch of fucking plants everywhere from the old assumption that have to die and then let the new thing grow into a new type of jungle, right? It's kind of how your awareness works. It's like a spotlight that grows whatever is focused on. So the good news is once you get the assumptions down, you can train them like a skill set, meaning that they will be, you'll become unconsciously competent at forming favorable assumptions. Because before you wake up and really understand that assumptions are creating the reality, you form a bunch of assumptions simply based off of what you see in the world, and you use that as the basically excuse to make your judgments and assumptions. When you reverse engineer it and you understand that the assumptions are actually the real creative power of the reality, and you start to hold favorable assumptions in total ignorance, right? Just completely ignoring, total ignorance of the external reality, and you focus your energy on your assumption, what'll happen is you'll start to see the reality start to bend over backwards and do triple fucking backflips to make your assumption correct, and it fully reinvigorates you, re-energizes you, empowers you. So you just want to understand that your assumptions are the real baseline of conscious creation. If you can start to form really good assumptions that are extremely lopsided favorable to you, and you put a majority of your energy into making sure that all of your assumptions are really, really strong, that will give you a bedrock for you to create the rest of your reality a hell of a lot easier. Because if you have an assumption that everything always works out for you 100% of the time, and that's your dominant assumption in life, like, you're fucking unstoppable, because you know no matter what happens, it is going to work out in your favor. So any hiccup is just a blip on the radar, and it's just a point of contrast for you to more clearly define what you want, because everything works out the way you want it to, no exceptions. So law of assumption is great. The only thing to do is to just really understand that when you hold an assumption, you focus on the feeling of it versus the manifestational content, because the manifestational content is all a byproduct of the state. So don't over leverage yourself. Your leveraged power is in the assumption. Your leveraged power is in the dominant perception of that thing being the way you want it to be, and you just watch the magic happen from that power position. And it doesn't mean that, you know, the fun's all over or whatever, like there's gonna be, you know, you're gonna miss out on anything. Like, I'm telling you guys, the assumption is the core thing that you want to focus on, because it's like a atom bomb when it comes to getting what you want. If that core assumption is really, really strong, every single thing has to meet the same frequency as that assumption. Everything. And then everything else kind of passes out of your purview that is not complementary to that. So I hope this was helpful. If you guys want more goodies, watch the rest of the videos. If you want one-on-one type of jams, check the description. Other than that, peace out and keep fucking conquering.